Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about strength training and smaller movements, because this is really a nuanced topic. And it came up because in one of the videos I made yesterday, someone made a comment that, Jason, you said talking about strength training is big movements. Well, if someone is trying to get stronger on smaller movements, that still counts as strength training. And the answer is going to be yes, but not necessarily the same thing. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this, because this is kind of a nuanced thing. And here's what I mean. Yes, there's a certain degree of truth to that, and yes, smaller movements can even increase your strength on bigger movements. But what people need to understand is that when it comes to both the health benefits of strength training as well as the performance benefits of strength training, smaller movements do not bring as much to the table. They just do not. They're not capable of doing so. Furthermore, the smaller a movement gets, the more difficult it becomes to actually train. And that's a big point that people need to remember. Small movements will not train long term. They won't. They will not. You can't do it. The bigger movements are required to feed their strength. And in other words, what I mean on that, let's say you're talking about a barbell curl. Let's say you do nothing but curls, particularly strict curls. Now, when you turn it into a compound movement, the way you see me doing mine, that's different because it becomes multi-joint and it gets a nervous system component in there, like as far as motor patterns go, that is a little bit different. It's more trainable. But the smaller and smaller the movement gets, and the more you isolate muscles, the more you remove the ability to train them. And people say, what do you mean train? Training means being able to take an exercise and to progress on it for a year straight. For example, like if you take someone who's fairly new to the gym and you have them start an exercise, every single month they should be stronger for an entire year than they were the month before. Isolation movements will not do that. They require the big exercises to feed your strength on them. And if you don't believe me, well, I wouldn't recommend you do this, but cut out all of your back movements and see how much your curls go up. In other words, if you were to take out all of your back exercises, I mean your rows, your pull-ups, your lat pull-downs, everything that uses the biceps with the back, and you were to try to just train the curl, particularly concentration curls, they may actually regress, and they will not increase. Your curls are going to stagnate for that year. In other words, if you're doing concentration curls with 25 pounds for sets of 10, and you cut all the back exercises out for a year, you still might be, after an entire year, 25 for sets of 10, and you might actually lose strength. And this is something I think guys like Ripto and them noticed over the years of coaching people. Small exercises will not train. They won't train. They'll do it for a short period of time, like 6 to 8 weeks, but if they do not have a compound movement to feed them, they won't continue to improve. They just stagnate and stop. So the smaller the movement gets, the more difficult it becomes to strength train it. In fact, at a certain threshold, it becomes impossible to strength train it. And that's kind of a take-home that people need to understand with this stuff. Small movements are supplemental exercises, and they absolutely require bigger exercises to feed their performance increases. And this is something that we saw in lab studies. I mean, there were some studies done, and I've linked them in the past, and people say, Jason, why don't you link studies below? Because I've gotten in trouble with YouTube over it before, so it's not worth the hassle. You guys can find these studies easy enough on Google. But what's been noted, like let's say we take squats versus leg extensions. When it's been studied in the lab, and you take people who they have them spend X number of weeks, like 10 weeks working on the squat, and you have another group of people spend 10 weeks working on the leg extension exclusively, and then they come back and they test their strength, which one do you think has a stronger leg extension? Because people will say, well, specificity of training, obviously leg extensions will improve your leg extension strength more than the squat will. No, it actually doesn't. The people who do only squats are stronger on the leg extension machine the first time they try it. So if they have them test it one time and then spend X number of weeks training just the squat, so that they found their baseline strength, their strength increases on the leg extension more from doing squats than the group that's doing leg extensions to failure in strength training and everything else. He was training just the leg extension. The people who train the leg extension don't gain as much strength on the leg extension as the people who did only squats and no leg extensions. Their strength gain on the leg extension increases more. All right, now that speaks volumes. That speaks absolute volumes about how much more big movements improve small movements than small movements can improve small movements. So the point is, you can talk all you want about strength training with smaller exercises, but the best way to build a small exercise is to use a big exercise. The big exercises, when it's been studied, increase performance more on the small exercises than actually practicing the small movement does. So is that really strength training? No, the squat is strength training for the leg extension. The weighted chin-up is actually strength training for the curl if your goal is to get a better curl. Now, you should do both, because here's what you find. The people who do both obviously get even better at the small movement. But a very, very large chunk of the strength that they gain on it comes from the bigger exercises. That's why if you do too many isolation movements and not enough compounds, guess what? Your isolation movements don't even improve anymore. They stop improving. They fail to improve significantly, and you completely stop growing. Again, something you have to be aware of when we're talking about all of this. Now, here's the other thing, though. If you can find certain isolation movements that do carry over, I mean, a perfect example. Let's talk about getting better at weighted pull-ups and weighted chin-ups. You guys see me doing a compound curl. It's a bit of a cheat curl, and then I'm using shoulder to bring it up at the top. I've taken a curl and I turned it into a multi-joint exercise. Well, interestingly enough, that shoulder movement is one of the functions of the bicep, right? It is one of the functions of the bicep, and that movement, yeah, it doesn't just move the elbow, people. Look at how the tendons insert. One of the heads of the bicep actually is dependent upon shoulder, the movement of your shoulder joint, just like with the tricep. It's the same way. The elbow alone doesn't fully activate all the functions of those muscles. It can't. So there is some extra performance potential and muscle to be gained by adding that extra joint, and that will actually carry over better than a strict curl will to improving those other exercises, because you know what? Those are exercises in which bicep strength can be a limiting factor. In other words, if you have really weak biceps, it's going to limit the strength on your chin-ups and pull-ups. So that's an example of how a smaller movement in strength training can facilitate a bigger movement. Yeah, absolutely. But you're training them concurrently. You're training them together at the same time, and they do facilitate gaining strength in each other. All right, because, yeah, it can be difficult sometimes to use just one single movement, and if those muscles, main muscles involved in that movement, are only really worked on that big exercise, your progress can stall a little more. So there is a place for supplemental exercises that are smaller in strength training, particularly as we get more advanced. There's a place for that. They can feed into each other, absolutely can, but they've got to be done correctly. So the point we come back to, though, is that you can say all you want about, well, training for a smaller movement is still training for strength if that movement's increasing, but the smaller the movement is, the shorter the time frame in which it will train, and it will completely stagnate. And if you don't do any big exercises for those same muscles, you're going to reach a point to where your strength could stagnate on that smaller exercise for an entire year, no matter how much you program it. You can try to program whatever periodization or anything you want for it, and it may completely stall and stop increasing. In which case you're no longer training, are you? It's not working. The other point we get to with strength training, we can talk about the benefits of strength training. You know, we have all these health benefits we discuss. What are they? Things like fighting osteoporosis, fighting off cancer, cardiovascular disease. All of these things are heavily correlated with strength training as far as reducing mortality from them, reducing incidences of this. I mean, it's very well documented. So it's, you know, again, I think this may have came out of the video where I was discussing that in longevity from the Forbes article, and what small movements facilitate doing those things. Why do those exercises actually stop osteoporosis? Because they load the structure of your body. They load the structure of your body. They put weight on your spine, and it's adaptative stress that increases bone density in your spine. People need to understand that. Loading your back up will strengthen it. Your cartilage, your bones, things like that respond to training in a similar way that muscles do. And so people can talk about, oh, you're just trying to train the muscles. No, you're not just trying to train the muscles. That's absurd. Anyone who's telling you that joints and bones do not receive benefits from strength training is so ignorant that they're not entitled to an opinion, right? They shouldn't even have it. You don't listen to that person. They're not entitled to an opinion. They don't even understand basic exercise science and the way the body adapts. Your bones respond to resistance training. Your bones actually, when you lift, get microfractures and cracks in them as a result of it. From your heavy training, your bones get cracks in them during the workout. Well, how do you think your body adapts to that? It fills those cracks back in with minerals, calcium, magnesium, all that stuff, and it increases the bone mineral density. Your bones get denser as a result of strength training now. All right, what does that have to do with affecting things like osteoporosis? How about loss of height with age because your spine starts losing bone minerals? Problems in your hips because you're getting, again, osteoporosis and stuff. Resistance training prevents that. What do you think puts more load on all of those structures to give that response? Tons of smaller movements or the big exercises, particularly big exercises where you stand, squats, deadlifts, right? Things like that. Which do you think is going to have the larger response on the system and the structures of the body, the bones and everything? Those do. All right, that's an entire category of health problems that we get with aging that training the big movements prevents, and training the small movements really may not have the effect you want. Well, the same thing when it comes to, we start looking at cancer. Why is it that we get lower cancer rates when we strength train? Because the muscles in our body become more sensitized to insulin. It improves insulin sensitivity. It affects nutrient partitioning in the body. That actually affects the ability of tumors to grow or not. Do you really think doing a bunch of small exercises is going to give you the same response? No, of course not. The big exercises that really work all the big muscles hard, the quads, the glutes, the lats, right? These big muscles that get worked much harder on the big movements, that's taking more muscle mass in the body and training it, right? Those bigger muscles contribute more to fighting off things like insulin, resistance related things. So it's diabetes, cancer, stuff like that, right? They have the most powerful response. So do you really think smaller exercises are going to give that same benefit to the same degree? They can't. They can't. They can help a little bit, but not as much. So when we start talking about health benefits, yes, the big movements are overwhelmingly superior for the health benefits. And that cannot be overlooked. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.